Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Vallenfyre record, Splinters. This is the sophomore full-length LP from the UK-based metal outfit Vallenfyre. They're seen as a bit of an underground supergroup, considering that the band's frontman and guitarist Gregor McIntosh played guitar in Paradise Lost. Band member Hamish Glencross also played guitar in My Dying Bride, as well as the band Solstice, and the band's drummer Adrian Erlandson also played in Paradise Lost, as well as Cradle of Filth and many other bands too. Now, I first came across these guys in 2011 when they dropped their full-length debut album titled A Fragile King. It was an album that combined the slow and heavy sounds of doom metal with the abrasiveness of death metal. Sonically, it was a little standard for death doom, but the subject matter of these tracks were really what caught my attention. A lot of the tracks lyrically on this album dive into the personal suffering felt by Gregor McIntosh after losing his father to lung cancer in 2009. And the lyrics go about addressing this pain, addressing this loss in a kind of poetic way, which was a pretty moving and emotional and interesting angle for a death metal record. But there were a lot of very slow, dreary, deep cuts on this LP that just didn't really connect with me. But still, the performances on this record were good. It seemed that the band put value on production value with just how massive and atmospheric a lot of these songs sounded. And while I wasn't really familiar with Gregor's singing abilities prior to the release of this record, he seemed like he had the makings of becoming a really monstrous death metal vocalist. And then I heard Kurt Ballou of Converge was doing production on this thing, who you may or may not know is really probably my favorite producer right now. However, I did not just fall in love with the sound of this Vallenfyre record, as fantastic as it is with all these very clear, punchy, pummeling drums, blood-caked guitars, the vocals sit in a really perfect spot in the mix. All that's great, but it's really the fact that these guys came through with a more diverse record this time around that really had me listening to this thing from beginning and end and liking it. However, I'm not really sure if this change of pace is going to please death doom fans or even hardcore death metal fans, people who have been following the band up until this point. I mean, Vallenfyre still comes through, still births some really slow, monolithic, devilish death doom on a few tracks here. They even managed to embrace a little bit of melody on these tracks, but I would expect nothing less from a band related to My Dying Bride. However, mixed in with this handful of songs, Vallenfyre puts in some really fast-paced songs, just some really violent songs. These guys seem to be embracing sort of a death and roll aesthetic like you would get with a band such as Entombed. But I actually think going that far back isn't as accurate a comparison as a more recent band that does death and roll like Black Breath, who Kurt Ballou actually did production for as well. Like the 1 minute and 27-second song Instinct Slaughter, which is speedy, it's relentless, it's ferocious and heavy, it's got kind of a punk attitude and doesn't sound too unlike a band like Nails with Unsilent Death, at least in the guitars. So to some people, especially hardcore death metal fans who like these various strains of the genre to not bleed into one another too much, this LP might sound like kind of a mixed bag. But personally for me, the guitar tone, just the sound of the drums and the vocals are enough to create a common thread that runs throughout all these tracks. Plus, I'm sort of into the idea that this depressing cloud that the band was formed under on their debut album is dissipating or just sort of moving away a little bit, freeing the band up to explore more aggressive material. Because there are certainly tracks on this LP that transition from these slow, doomy guitar passages to something more hardcore and overtly aggressive. Despite that, I have to say, I don't think Splinters is going to be the most bold and refreshing death metal album you hear this year. But I do think it brings together a very good mix of tracks that are incredibly visceral or very bleak and depressing in their slow pace and heaviness. The most stunning of which is the song Bereft, the longest track here. It features all these melodic guitar leads, some of which are harmonized with one another, that are woven into these monolithic riffs that are encased into this buzzsaw distortion. And lyrically, I'm catching a lot of the same loss and religious themes that I was hearing on A Fragile King, and they still work pretty well here. The title track is another example of these doomier flavors executed in a really great way. And from here, it just seems that the band gets faster and heavier and more aggressive. But it's not like the band is playing doom and they're playing fast-paced death and roll. There's a bit of a gradient here. And on the most intense side of this gradient, these more fast-paced aggressive songs can occasionally be a little hit or miss, like the hyper-aggressive Instinct Slaughter that I mentioned earlier. This track and other songs on here that tend to land around the 2-minute mark, while Vallenfyre is perfectly capable of playing this fast and playing this aggressively, there's not much about the sound of their instrumentation or their riffs that really sticks out. It really feels like they're just going through the motions on tracks like this. Even after they put them immediately after some of the slower songs on this record, as if they're creating this really breakneck change by putting the slowest track here next to the fastest and shortest track when, I mean, really in reality, it's all loud as hell and super grimy and aggressive, so it's not like the change is that great. There are some more aggressive tracks on here that manage to pack in a little bit of melodic finesse though, like SCABS, the opener on here, which has this interesting little 4-note, I believe, guitar lead that really brings a somber tone to these riffs, which are really slow, intense, and heavy at the start of the song, but then the band immediately breaks into something speedier and more intense. I also love the wailing guitar leads that call and respond with the vocals on the track Savages Arise. There's a killer breakdown in the second half that I love, and the band manages to bring a lot of very surprising changes and just twists and turns into this 2-minute and 40-second runtime on this track. There are a lot of just riff and performance highlights throughout this album, and that's because at the end of the day, even if you are underwhelmed by Vallenfyre's lack of originality, they are a well-greased death machine with fantastic production, good songs, and good riffs most of the time. Their approach might be a little too simple to blow anybody away, especially a seasoned death metal fan, but I personally value the fact that whenever I listen to this thing, I'm having a pretty strong physical response to it. Yes, at the end of the day, I do really want more from this band, lyrically and compositionally, but I still think that if you're looking for some death metal that's going to hit hard and be thrilling, be exciting, be aggressive, then there's no reason not to look into this LP. I'm feeling a strong 6 to a light 7 on this. Transition, if you've given this record a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it, Anthony Fantano, Vallenfyre, forever.